Good afternoon, George, and happy Labor Day. It's Jesse here again in the Ivory Tower Collections game room, and sitting here next to me is, of course, your Intellivision SVA, Super Video Arcade. And yeah, it's done. It's ready to go. It's looking great. So let's go over the project really quickly. So, you sent the console to me. You've purchased it recently, I believe. And so, of course, after unboxing it, the first thing I did was connect it up to my diagnostics and check everything out. And there were no issues to be found with the console. It's working fine. Having said that, I still did some preventive measures and maintenance on it as part of the refurbishment process on the console. Now, in the case of the Intellivision, a refurbishment is a little more involved than it might be on some of the other consoles that I've serviced for you. That's just because there's a lot more parts that I tend to replace that can go bad. So as an example, of course, all of the capacitors have been replaced on not only the main board itself, but also the power supply board that's inside the console. Although the original capacitors in the Intellivision, I don't think I've ever seen any that showed any evidence of leaking. They are 40 years old, and especially in the case of the power supply capacitors, they were really only rated for so many hours, and it gets really, really hot inside the Intellivision. So they were probably on their way out anyway, and it's just a good idea to get them replaced. In addition to that, I also replaced out a high wattage resistor. It's a 12 ohm ceramic resistor that's on the power supply board. Over time, again, those get really hot. They have a lot of current that they have to handle whenever the console's operating. And so the originals are starting to flake and fall apart. Now, I didn't witness anything like that with yours. Honestly, if I was to hazard a guess, I don't think there's many hours on this console. I say that just because of other physical evidence inside that kind of leads me to believe that. For instance, the lack of wear on some of the components. But again, they're 40 years old and you've got the console here and we can't take a chance, so I basically replaced out a whole gamut of things. I also put new thermal paste on the voltage regulators on the power supply. And then on the main board itself, there's a little bit of work that's done there as well. So for starters, I replaced the reset capacitor, which isn't really critical. But again, it's a capacitor, it's 40 years old. It gets replaced with a newer type that really shouldn't ever go bad. In addition to that, all the other capacitors on the main board have been replaced, as I mentioned previously, but also there's a pair of transistors that handle some of the signals and power to the CPU. And the originals, while they were fine for what they were doing, again, the console gets really hot, and especially those little transistors, they get blazing hot. So I do replace them out with some higher quality ones, and the ones that I install, I also have attached heat sinks to help dissipate even that much more heat off of those transistors. I'm sure it's not a ton, but it's better than not having anything at all and should hopefully allow them to last for a longer amount of time. But the big star of the show, of course, is the audio-video upgrade that has been applied. So you have a no-cut option that's been installed using one of my very last remaining CKing RGB boards for the Intellivision. That board, as the name implies, does provide good quality RGB output, but it also provides composite and S-video if that is also wired. In the case of your particular Intellivision, we have the RGB and we have the composite output wired up to a 9-pin mini-DIN jack that is installed in place of where the RF modulator used to be. It's wired up for Sega console wiring, so you should be able to use RGB cables for the Sega system without issue, things like the HD Retrovision cables. I'm going to be showing you a set of those today on the console. I basically have a clone of the HD Retrovision cables that I use that I like a lot. You can use the RAD2X, which converts the signals straight to HDMI. Those work really well. So yeah, there's a couple of different options. But you can also just get a set of Genesis Model 2 standard composite AV cables if you want composite, and you could use that also. And obviously the audio comes through that mini DIN jack just as well. Another change is that the channel select switch, which is located on the bottom of the console, normally has no function at all unless you're using the RF. Well, the RF gets removed as part of this process when I install this new board. So what I do is I repurpose the channel select switch as a palette switch. That's because the RGB board has two separate palettes programmed into it that you can switch on the fly as you're playing games, because you might find that certain colors might look better on one game versus another. So it's good that you have that option to be able to switch. And with the channel select switch being on the bottom of the console, again, I don't have to do any modifications to the case shell to be able to use it. It's already there and it has a new purpose. And as to make it easier to use, I actually raise the switch a little bit higher on the main board, which when everything gets installed, it's hard to explain, but basically the main board sits upside down inside of these consoles. So the switch actually pokes out a little bit further through the bottom of the shell, making it easier to reach and to use. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Of course, I gave the system a complete cleaning. I did check out both of your controllers and they're working just fine. So no issues to have there. So with that, George, I'm going to turn my camera around. We're going to point it at my TV behind me here. Now, I will state that since the last time I did any services for you, we've had a few upgrades in the game room. The TV behind me is now an OLED that has HDR capability, and there's new software on my OSSC that kind of allows some HDR functionality. So what I'm stating is it's going to look really vibrant and crisp on my setup here, but obviously it could differ and look a little different for you on your setup. It's just part of the upgrades. I'm slowly upgrading and trying to get a little more modernized in my game room going to the future of things. So again, with that, George, I'll be right back. George, I have my camera pointed at my OLED here in the game room, and I have your console connected up. Now again, the cable set I'm using here is from Retro Gaming Cables out of the UK, and it is basically their version of the HD Retrovision cables. That is, it takes the RGB signals designed for a Sega console, like the Genesis for instance, and converts them into a component output that I can then run into my Xtron and through the rest of my AV setup and eventually to my TV here. So anyway, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and get started with the diagnostics. Now, because this is a Sears console, I actually have to use a newer diagnostic image. And here we are looking at the MTE Test Diagnostics image ROM, and this is version 4.1. And again, I have to use this particular version because it's the only one that properly recognizes the Sears console and the Model 2 Intellivision. If you weren't aware, the Sears model features slightly different ROM characters in it. So as an example, some of the fonts might look a little bit different in games than they would on the actual Mattel version of the console. And another interesting difference is that title screens of Mattel games normally would say Mattel Electronics Presents, and then it would have the title of the game. On the Sears consoles, that's not present. You just have just the title. So it's one of those interesting quirks, but it's cool, and I still think the Sears version is my favorite. So we're looking at the color bars and controller diagnostics portion of the test. So as you can see, controller 1 is controlling properly, and yes, it is on the right-hand side of this test. I know that seems backwards, but that's how it is. Here's the upper right fire, upper left fire, lower right, lower left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, clear, 0, and enter. So no problems there. Second player controller, again, controlling excellent, very smooth motion. Upper right fire, upper left fire, lower right, lower left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, clear, 0, and enter. So yeah, no problems at all with the controllers. They're working just fine. But again, this is also a good screen to show you the difference in the palettes. This is the more vibrant palette and is kind of what I would use as the default for a majority of the games. But there is another palette option. And it results in a little bit darker, more muted colors. But that's what this one looks like. And again, I'm switching between that on the fly using the channel select switch on the bottom of the console. So again, you might find that there are some games where this palette might look better than others. Or there might be some where you prefer this one. I tend to prefer this one. This is more in line with what the Intellivision was putting out through the RF and with what we see through most emulation. But again, there are certain circumstances where you might prefer the other. So from this test, it's going to go through what's called the stick test, which is actually checking the graphics character chip and the graphics character ROMs in addition to the audio. So here we go. No problems there. Everything's working great. Now, during the stick test, if there had been any issues with the console, with the logic, that would have appeared as error codes that would have come across the screen, which again, we're not seeing anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the rest of the test screens. And that's it. All parts tested out just fine. And then it takes me back to the controller test screen where we were at before. So yeah, again, nothing wrong physically with the console. It's functioning as we would expect. So let's take a look at some games. And I will be using my back bit for the rest of this demonstration, and I'm only going to just show you just a few games. I'm not sure which ones you might plan to play on the Intellivision. I don't know how new you are to the console, but it does have what some consider to be one of the best versions of Burger Time released at the time of these consoles. Now, one of the games that I think demonstrates the difference in the palettes, why you might want to switch between one or the other, is Donkey Kong for the Intellivision. Now, this is not the normal version. This is a new homebrew called Donkey Kong Arcade. Notice that right now the girders are kind of a pinkish, almost a purplish type color. Well, when I switch to the darker palette, they become red. So again, that's the darker palette where I have red, and that's the brighter palette where they look more pink, almost fuchsia. Mystic Castle is one of my favorite games on the Intellivision, and it's actually derived from the original game known as Thunder Castle. Mystic Castle is basically a homebrew hack of the original game to make it a little easier and quicker to play. So let's check it out. Now this is another game where actually the brighter palette I think looks a little bit better. We're currently under the darker muted palette. Let me show you the difference. There we are with the brighter palette. So in this mode, I think the trees stand out a lot better, and some of the yellows are a lot brighter. If you're not familiar with the game, basically you have several different levels that you play on. This is the starting one, the castle level. And the idea is that you touch these bats, which give you some sort of mystical power that allows you to then be able to slay the dragons. Each different board type will have a couple of different enemy types that you'll have to contend with. They always start off with the easiest one being green, then it goes to yellow, and then finally red. So I just got that dragon. Next will be the yellow one, and I'm just continuously touching the bats when I can to try to give me the upper edge. Now obviously the power-up doesn't last forever. See, it just wore off, but I'm getting ready to get another one. and be able to get the red dragon right here. That just worked out lucky for me. And then it goes on to the next screen, which is a different level, which has different enemy types. Again, this game's a lot of fun, and it's unique to the Intellivision. And then the last thing I'll show you is what I consider to be one of the most impressive homebrews I've seen for the Intellivision. And it's basically like Arkanoid, but it's called Stonix. This is another one that really benefits from the brighter color palette. So again, if you're familiar with Arkanoid, which is of course an advancement upon the old Breakout, this game is basically just like that. You have different power-ups that give you different skills. The E, for instance, allows me to grab things. That gives me an extra ball. There's the E again, which will let me catch the ball when it comes down. Ooh, too bad I couldn't get the Z. That's actually the laser in this one. And then that's like a slow down power-up. This is like, I call it the steel ball. It allows it to go through everything. So again, that's with the brighter palette, and then if we switch to the darker palette, I don't know, I mean, it still looks okay, but I just prefer the different color separation with this one. So again, different games may look better under one palette versus another, and it's good that you have the ability to switch between them. Well, George, there you go. There's your Sears Intellivision SVA, ready to go, and it looks great. This is one of the better looking consoles I've had come into the tower for a while as far as this model. It still has the usual blemishes on the back with some of the paint missing, but I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever seen a model of these that's not missing some paint back there. But aside from that, it's in pretty good shape. As is per the usual, when I go to send your console back, I will also have a bag here with all of the parts that have been removed. You can see the large filter capacitors here, as a matter of fact, in addition to the RF modulator, as an example of some of the components that were replaced. So what is the plan? Well, again, it is Labor Day, and it's currently in the afternoon, so I should be able to get this video done and edited and be able to upload it to my YouTube channel. As is usual, it will be an unlisted video, just again, for the privacy of my clients, but you're free to share the URL with the video to anyone you wish, and I believe YouTube even allows you to download the video as well. So from there, I will then get the console boxed back up and hopefully get it shipped out to you within the next day or two. Obviously, I'll send you an email once I've got the console shipped out and headed back your way, so that with the tracking information, so that you can follow it on its journey home. So George, thank you again for reaching out. I'm glad you were able to catch me before I ran out of these RGB boards, because I'm going to miss them. I'll tell you that a lot. I'm really going to miss these boards. They've been really super versatile to use in the Intellivision consoles for about the last 3 years. So I guess I had to come to an end at some point. But with that, I thank you again for your business, and I hope you have a good rest of your Labor Day Monday. I'll catch you another time.